Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quarantine Film Series, and we are coming to you live from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm your host, Kabir Segal. Coming to you live from my parents' home, really. So, Mom, I need you to get off the Wi-Fi so I can use the full internet internet speed. This show, as you know, we've done over 120 episodes now. We have started the show to put the spotlight back on the artists, the creative people that create incredible content. Films, music, books. And, we started this because the creative calendar was essentially canceled. Gigs, film festivals, it's been tough out there. But this is a platform to share the stories and the music that really you'll be discovering in the coming months and weeks ahead. And so I think if you have a question, one thing we want to emphasize is drop a comment in the question field. I'll be sure to ask the incredible guests we have. And if you want to get on the show, just hit me up on social media and we'll try to get you there. One thing also is we don't have a regular cadence quite yet for the film festival, for the film series. So stay tuned to my social media, subscribe, and you'll get notified. You'll be the first to know on when we're going live with these incredible artists. And we have an incredible artist today, really remarkable. I'm excited because, we like to do either films or music. He's someone who's kind of blended feels, a man who's creating his own aesthetic, right? That's the true definition of genius, right? Creating your own perspective, own sound, own voice. Sam Green is an Academy Award nominated documentary filmmaker based in New York. His recent film, 1,000 Thoughts, premiered at the 2018 Sundance Film Festival and is a live cinema collaboration with a legendary classical ensemble, the Kronos Quartet. You've got to see it if you can. We're going to talk about how you can do that. And his previous works include The Weather Underground, for which he was nominated for an Academy Award. Please welcome to the show one of the most remarkable filmmakers this side of the Mississippi River. Please welcome Sam Green.
Hey, how you doing?
Good to see you. Welcome to the show. Where are you broadcasting from today?
I'm actually in Woodstock, New York.
Well, I miss New York. I used to live in New York. I miss New York. I've got to ask you first, how has the quarantine affected you? What did you have lined up in your life that you've had to cancel or postpone?
Oh, wow. It's funny because you mentioned I made this kind of live cinema piece with the Kronos Quartet. And the thing with the live cinema pieces I make is that you can't watch them on YouTube or iTunes. We travel around and perform them for live audiences. And so Kronos Quartet and I had a bunch of screenings set up for this year. Like every couple of weeks, we'd do one in Dallas or Seattle or all over the place. We were going to Japan, and all those got canceled or postponed at least till next year. So that was a big bummer.
Yeah, I believe it. I also want to ask you, and I want to ask more about the film and the performances. But first, I want to ask, as sort of a creative person, how have you kept the creative flame alive during quarantine? Do you have like a schedule? Do you wake up at the same time? Do you prepare the coffee the same way? What's your routine like in quarantine?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, in a way, I mentioned it was sort of a big blow to get all these screenings canceled, but the upside is that I've had lots of time, and I've started working on a new project and doing like really deep research for a new film I'm making about sound. And so that's been the good part about quarantine, is just not traveling all over and being super busy, being able to focus. But my routine, I wake up early. I try to get up as early as I can. I make coffee. I have a calm moment. And then you'll see I have a child who may interrupt our interview. And so juggling childcare with my partner and all that has been a challenge. But I mean, I'm sure like most people, there's upsides to this. There's a lot of downsides, but there's upsides, which, hey, Bunny, you okay? Hey, I'll be done in a couple minutes, okay? That's quarantine.
I hear you. I hear you. Hey, my mom's right downstairs, so we should call this family reunion.
Right.
No, here, keep going.
Anyway, that's I don't have a routine, like down to the minute, but I try to work, and I work as much as I can.
Yeah, it makes sense. So tell me about your incredible film, 1,000 Thoughts. Now, did you know about the Kronos Quartet before Janet reached out for that short film?
It's funny. I had always sort of known something about the Kronos Quartet. I knew their name, and I think I'd listened to something here and there. But I wasn't a huge classical music person, and so the manager of the Kronos Quartet reached out to me. This is probably 6 years ago now, and asked out of the blue, and asked if I would make a short film about them for their 40th reunion or 40th anniversary concert at Carnegie Hall. A little historical documentary that could play right before they came on. And she said that they had an archive in San Francisco I could look through. And I love archives generally, so I thought, this sounds interesting, I'll do it. And the more I learned about them and the more I immersed myself in their music, I listened to almost all of their 50 records, the more I was just super knocked out with them as artists and as musicians. There was so much that interested me. So I made this little short piece, and then Janet said, do you want to make a longer, if you want to make a longer film, we'd be up for that. And I thought, because I generally can't stand music documentaries, and they're always the same, and they're always kind of, I don't know, there's such a formula for them. So I had been making these live cinema pieces, and at a certain point I thought, well, if I made a live cinema portrait of Kronos, they would play there. So not only would you learn about them, you'd experience their music at the same time. And it seemed like a perfect use of the form in a way, a perfect way to combine the power of cinema, the magic of being transported through cinema, with the immediacy of a live performance, the fact that you're in the room with people, there's a charge to that. So this thing I made, the goal was to combine those two powers and make something that uses sort of the best of all worlds. So these are some photos from screenings we do where we tour around and I narrate the piece in person, and Kronos plays a live soundtrack while there's interviews and, regular sort of documentary up on the screen.
Yeah. How did you go about collaborating on the repertoire of what was played? Because I noticed there was an album that was the Kronos released under the same name, right? And maybe a few years ago. Was that the catalyst, or have anything to do with the film?
No, I just, at a certain point, I'm terrible with names of films. Most of my films are like The Weather Underground, The Rainbow Man, very unimaginative. So I was really struggling with the name, and they had made an album called 1,000 Thoughts that one of the songs is an old, I believe it's Danish folk song called 1,000 Thoughts. So it's a name that sort of has many iterations, and I just like the phrase. But in terms of, so they play about 12 pieces of music in the show, in the film, live, and I picked those out. I sort of made the piece with Joe Beanie, who's a great documentary editor. He edited all of Herzog's films for 20 years, and he's amazing. And so we created the piece together, writing and editing and shaping it around these different pieces of music. But that was a huge challenge to figure out 12 pieces of music that represent their entire career, which is, like I said, 50 records. So that was a big job.
Yeah, I hear you. And I understand like the philosophy of the live music experience in the film. And I so appreciate that, as I'm a musician myself. But I'm also wondering, there's a trade-off to it, right, as well, because you don't get the distribution, or maybe you did. How do you get the film out there? And like, did you know going in that, I mean, what's your thinking on the business side? That how do you release it after spending so much time in?
I first started making live cinema pieces 10 years ago, and I sort of stumbled onto the form. It was, I was kind of like, well, maybe was struggling with the movie. Maybe I'll have it so that I talk and in person, and I just kind of like happened on it. And I made that film. It was called Utopian Four Movements. It screened at Sundance. And after that, I thought, I have no idea what to do with a live cinema piece, but I toured around with some musicians for about several years, 3 years, screening this thing all over the world. And it was so much fun. There's a lot of filmmakers who make films and then they want to just give it to somebody to put out there and they go back and make another film. But for me, one of the best parts of the process is putting it out in the world, engaging with the world and meeting people and traveling. And so I love that part of it. So I was very well suited for that. And there's the film world is very narrow in a way. And so I was really pleased to discover there's a whole world of performing arts venues and presenters, places where like a dance company would do a show, and I could do shows there. So what I started to do is do screenings in rock venues and art museums and performing arts venues and film festivals and film theaters. So it opened up this whole world of places to show work. And the model, it's funny because, not to get too into money, but money is important, and for an artist especially. And in this performing arts world, there's much more money than in the film world. So it has ended up being a good model, and there's no distributor. We just book the shows ourselves, or I do have a booking agent who sometimes books stuff. So, but with 1,000 Thoughts, you okay, Bunny? We grossed $1 million on the film, which is odd because nobody would think like, wow, a live cinema piece, you grossed $1 million, which we did, which I don't say, in a sort of braggy way. I'm just proud of that the movie has gotten out there that much that's the case.
That's amazing. Isabella.
One last thing, you are right in pointing out that it's a trade-off. Many fewer people see it, but I would argue that the people that do see it have a more meaningful experience, which is more important to me.
Yeah, well said, and I agree with that 100%. Isabella in Boston has a question. She says, "Sam, is there is live art cinema a genre, and if so, who are some of the leading lights, maybe historical leading lights of this tradition?"
Well, it's funny because there are people doing live cinema here and there, and actually sometimes people say like, wow, you made up this new form, but there's a lot of antecedents in film history for this kind of thing. So most people know in the early days of silent film, there was live music, and in Japan, there was this tradition called the Benchi tradition, which was people narrated films live to explain what was happening, and that was like a big deal in the early part of the 1900s. And then in the 1960s, there was a movement called expanded cinema, which was sort of like taking film and moving it beyond the screen in certain ways, adding liveness, adding performance. So that's an antecedent. There's also like a great thing I love, the ski filmmaker Warren Miller, who people might know, who was sort of like had his own, he was almost like the Grateful Dead of ski films. He had his own world, his own distribution world. He'd tour around. And for many years in the beginning, he did live narration with his films. There's also a genre called the travelogue, which was big in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. So there's a lot of other people who've done similar stuff. And now there are people somebody named Jem Cohen does live cinema. There's a handful of people doing this, so I'm not the only one. I sort of am the only one doing it in a documentary context. But
yeah, it's fascinating. And last question on this: tell me about the craft of making it. What were the kind of cameras you shot on, and then what did you do the editing in? If you can mention
some nerdy tech questions. Yeah. We filmed it with an old Red camera, 1,000 Thoughts. And just use the best lenses possible so it looked as good as possible. And then I edited on Premiere, which Joe Beanie hated, and it was like they're all sort of the same to me, but he's an old professional editor who uses Avid, and I convinced him to use Premiere, and he was is still mad about it. So
well, yeah, it turned out great. So for whatever it's worth, yeah. And I really do want to see it. It's usually I watch the films, but I do want to see it when the world resumes. It'd be wonderful to see it live. So I want to switch gears and talk about the Weather Underground,
sure,
if we can.
Yeah.
Tell me about why you wanted to take on that story in particular.
Yeah. Well, it's an old film. I made it. It came out in 2003, and it's about a radical student group that tried to overthrow the U.S. government. It's a true story, documentary in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, and I started making it in the late 1990s, which is ancient history by now. But I made it just because it felt all those issues and the issues the film raises felt so distant. If people lived through the 90s were like a very kind of vapid time in a way. People were not talking about serious issues sort of in a broad cultural sense. And the issues raised by the film seemed important. And so it's weird because the film goes in and out of resonance, and now it's having a moment again where it sort of feels relevant. But
why do you think that is? Because I feel the same way. Why do you think it's sort of resonating today? What's going on in today's society that?
Well, you know, I mean, the Weather Underground talked about being white people. They talked about white privilege. They talked about a person's responsibility for what your government does. And, you know, they were reacting to what they saw as the U.S. government committing genocide in Vietnam. And so I think a lot of people are wrestling with those kinds of issues now. And so there's a kind of resonance. Hey, Bunny, come over here. Come sit here.
Come join us. What was the response of the film? The sort of the critical response to that film.
What was the critical response?
Yeah, of the weather. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was funny because when I made the film, started making it in the late 1990s, and I made it with an old pal named Bill Siegel and a friend named Carrie Lozano. We all worked together on this. And when we started making it in the late 1990s, we thought, oh, this would be interesting, of interest to baby boomers and maybe some political people, but a pretty narrow interest. And then September 11th happened, and the idea of, and there was a war, and the idea of political violence and the questions the film raised were much more relevant and in the air. So the film got out way more than I thought and was nominated for an Oscar. You mentioned that, and on PBS and in theaters and in the Whitney Biennial. So it really got out there more. And I tried to make it a very even-handed film. And so...
Where can folks check out this movie?
Oh, you can see it on iTunes, I think, or on if you search through my website, the iTunes version isn't the director's cut. So I have a way you can watch through Vimeo, like the best version of it. So if you want to find it, just Google me and you'll be able to find it.
Yeah, sounds good. Your new movies, as we've been talking about, they're more like the Snapchat version, where they happen for a moment and then they're experiential. Yeah, that's your distribution channel, Snapchat, right? So talk to me about your new project and what is the current stage of it. This is 32 Sounds.
Yeah, it's a live cinema piece again. I keep coming back to this form because I like it so much, and it's called 32 Sounds, and it's a live cinema piece about sound, which sounds funny, no pun intended. But it's a kind of essay built around 32 specific recordings of things. From the foghorns of San Francisco to the Peace Bell and Hiroshima, just different sounds that are iconic or interesting in one way or another. And it's an essay about sound and perception, and I think it's going to be really great. There's going to be live music from a musician named J.D. Sampson, who I really love and have worked with. So the thing with this is, one of the big challenges with this piece is, how do you make a live cinema piece about sound and tour at a lot of venues that have bad sound? And so what we're going to do is everybody's going to wear really great headphones, and we'll bring the headphones and have 500 sets of headphones. So it'll be a very powerful experience. And my goal is that you'll leave the theater with your ears super open and hear the world in new ways.
I hear you. Ruth wants to ask, you do so many projects around music and sound. Did you ever want to be a musician, or do you play an instrument yourself?
Oh yeah, I always wanted. I played piano when I was a kid, but I never was in a band. And I think part of this is wanting to be in a band. and in some ways, this is as close as I can get now. It's funny because David Harrington, at some point, the leader of the Kronos Quartet, we were on stage and he was like, well, we're a quintet now or something, you know, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm in the Kronos Quartet.
Ultimate compliment.
But I
and what
love
is
music. And so I also love working with musicians, and this is a great way to do that in a much more collaborative and in-depth way.
Yeah, Jason in Mobile, Alabama asking, Sam, what are your go-to albums of all time?
Oh, wow. Well, I love Yola Tango, and I did a project with them, and there's a song they made called The Seahorse. And I have probably listened to that 3,000 times maybe, or 4,000 times. Sometimes I'll go through periods where I listen to it every single day. It's there's something about that song that really does something. So it's not one of my go-to albums, but it's a song I listen to over and over again. And other albums, wow. I like so many different kinds of music. I'll have a good list in 20 minutes probably.
Gotcha. And Roberto in Savannah has a question. He says he's studying, he's in film school right now. What advice do you have for aspiring filmmakers to become professional documentarians?
Oh, wow. That's such a good question and such a hard question right now in a way. When I was first starting, somebody said to me, you can't make a living making documentary films, so you have to get a technical skill. You either got to learn how to shoot or edit, and that's how you can make a living, and then you can make films. And it was good advice, and I learned how to edit. And so for a long time, I edited films. I edited a lot of bad documentaries for the History Channel. You might see late at night. And I've been trying to think what would be the equivalent advice now, and I think just learning a lot of good technical skills where you can make a decent amount of money in a freelance way and then be able to do your work.
Yeah.
You know, because everybody has to figure out how to, unless you have a trust fund, how to make work and make a living at the same time. So maybe learning a lot of web design, podcasty, how to shoot, how to edit. I mean, there's a lot more technical skills now, but figuring out a way to make a living and then be able to do your work is the real challenge.
That is great advice and great counsel. Get good at something first, and then you can maybe get some career capital to do what you want. Great to have you on the show. Where can we find you on social media? It looks like we have your samgreen.to. That's your website.
Samgreen.to. There were so many Sam Greens out there. I couldn't get samgreen.com or .org or, so I had to, Tonga sells its domain name. So I got samgreen.to.
Gotcha.
But I'm most into Instagram. I'm on Twitter, but I'm not super into it. Facebook's okay, but I really actually love Instagram. So.
Yeah. You must be a national hero in Tonga. Maybe worth the trip. You might be surprised. There might be a fan club there. Yeah, Sam, thanks for
domain names.
Yeah, exactly. Sam, thanks for being on the show. Great to have you. I encourage everyone to go to your social media, Instagram, website, and when the world resumes, please check out your live performances with the Kronos Quartet.
Come here, Bunny. Come here. It's great talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. Everyone, please keep it here for the latest quarantine film series. We'll be bringing you broadcasts, several more over the next coming weeks. So stay tuned to my social media, and you'll be the first to know when we post it and when we go live. Hope everyone has a great day and have a great weekend. Bye, everyone.